A modular system is nothing without modulation, and envelope generators are one way to sculpt your patches and add variation to the sounds you're creating. Today I'm looking at 3 different quad envelope generators that are known to pack a lot of functionality into a small HP footprint. We'll look at the vector-based Zadar, the ADSR envelope generator Quadigy, and the Buchla style-inspired Quadrax. For each module, I'll create a basic patch first so you can have a look at the workflow of each module, followed by a few more patches showing additional functionalities. There's a summary of the pros and cons of each module at the end of the video as well. Let's get right into it. Alright, so I've set up a basic subtractive patch with an oscillator voice going into a filter, into a VCA, and we're using Quadigy envelope 1 to control the filter and the envelope 2 to control the VCA. Controlling the Quadigy is quite straightforward. With the buttons at the top, we can select which envelope we want to control. And then we use the sliders to change various parameters on the Quadigy. Because we're using the faders to control different parameters and different envelopes, they may not represent the parameter value that we currently want to change. In order to change that parameter then, we first need to go to the right position with the fader, and only then it will have an effect on the current parameter. In this case, the release time of envelope 1. Besides ADSR values, we can also control the pre-delay, the hold, the punch, or the global timing. And the feature I particularly like is that for attack, decay, and release, we can set up how logarithmic or exponential the curves are, which gives you a ton of fine-tuning potential. There are a few more settings you can select, which I just put on the screen here. We can also set up each envelope separately, or we can press 2 or more buttons at the top at the same time to change the settings of each of those envelopes at the same time. And here's a quick example of how I normally use the Quadigy. I switch between the ADSR and the shape screen to fine-tune my envelopes. And you can also press the top encoder to preview those envelopes. To program the CV control, all you have to do is to press the matrix CV button and then the EG button. And then if you press the CV matrix button and preset button at the same time, we are selecting the user input, which is the encoder, or we could also select CV input A or input B as our modulation source. Next, we go to the parameter we want the CV to affect and use the fader to set the amount. And of course, you can use all 4 envelopes at the same time. So in this patch here, I use one envelope to fade out my oscillator voice and another envelope to bring in the instro afterwards. So only one of those will be playing most of the time. I'm using the last 2 envelopes of the Quadigy to change the wavetable of my piston Honda. And I'm using the trigger from my keyboard to trigger all of the Quadigy envelopes and also the recording feature of my R-bar. Quadigy also has a cycle mode where it is synced to a BPM that you can set. In this case, the envelope will always fill out 1 full quarter note, and the ADSR values are shown as a percentage of how much they take up that quarter note space. Next up, we have the Intellijel Quadrax, a quad CV generator module where each generator can be set up in one of 5 modes: an attack release mode, an attack hold and release mode, a cycle mode, burst, as well as a LFO mode. Most functions for all 4 generators can be reached right at the front panel. For example, in the attack release mode, we can change the attack and default time of the envelope just by dialing the corresponding knobs. The middle button changes how logarithmic or exponential the shapes of the rise and the fall envelope are. The second mode on the Quadrax is an attack, hold, and release envelope. And that means that after the attack, if we're still holding the trigger, the envelope will be held at the highest volume. And only when we release the gate, the release time will start. I don't find this particularly useful for controlling filter cutoff or VCA because it's not very musical, but it can be interesting to control other musical parameters with that. We can link each of the function generators in a couple of different ways to be triggered. So for example, here I've set up envelope 2 when envelope 1 receives a gate. And now all I need to do is to fine tune the parameters to get to the bass sound that I like. In order to program our CV, we have to long press on the CV button corresponding to the CV input we want to change, in this case CVA. And once in the CV assignment screen, the left buttons will select which envelope to control, and clicking the right button will change how much that CV input will control, for example, rise, fall, level, or shape. Another long press and we'll leave the CV assignment mode. So in this patch example here, envelope number 2 is controlling the release time of envelope number 1, and so we get those typical bouncing ball patches. Another cool feature that Quadrax offers is its burst mode. In burst mode you can make some really cool gestures by messing around with the controls. Let me show you a few examples. The Quadrax also has an LFO mode that can be beat synced with a variety of shapes available, and as an alternative mode it has a random CV generator. So last but not least, let's have a look at the Zadar. The Zadar is a vector-based envelope generator, which means that it has a lot of vectors built in that you can choose from. Once you select a shape you like, you can use the controls to further adjust them to your liking. For example, the warp will move the shape backwards and forwards, and the response will increase the contrast between high and low values. The timing value decides how long the envelope is, and the DGAG trigger character will decide if the envelope is re-triggered from the beginning or from an earlier envelope position with the same CV value to avoid clicking. The level knob will control the maximum CV output of the envelope, and the sustain setting will let us select a point in the vector that is held as long as the input trigger is high. Pressing the red button will let us make CV assignments. For example, we can use the output of envelope 2 to control the length of envelope 1 using this interface. With that we can set up the bouncing ball patch again. But note that with the Zadar, each CV input is hardwired to one envelope, so you can only assign one CV per envelope and not more. We can also set up how the 4 envelopes are chained together, if they loop, or if they start slightly delayed from one another. Setting the Zadar envelopes to really short time intervals, looping them, and then using the CV input to control the time at a -50 rate makes it possible to use the Zadar as an oscillator that tracks roughly 1 volt per octave. Alright, let's get it all together. If you don't have an ADSR envelope, but you want to use your rack for traditional subtractive synthesis or similar patches, you really should consider getting the Quadigy. For less than 300 euros, you get 4 ADSR envelope generators that will fit most synthesis needs. It can't do free-running LFOs like the other 2 modules shown, but it offers a ton of fine-tuning options by adjusting the curvature of each of your envelopes. I use the Quadigy in most of my more traditional patches, and it will certainly never leave my rack. If you already have ADSR envelopes, or you want to follow a more West-style Buchla-type synthesis approach, consider the Quadrax. Quadrax is super hands-on, doubles as an LFO and a burst or a random smooth voltage generator as well. I love the immediacy of the module. It's meant to be adjusted live and played like an instrument, which it does really well. The 4 CV ins can be routed to any parameter, giving you more options for complex wave shapes than the other 2 modules presented. It's also the most expensive module on here, so unless you're sure you can live without traditional ADSR shapes, I would not recommend it as your only envelope generator. That being said, this is a powerhouse as a second envelope generator to complement a standard ADSR envelope with some neat extra functions for a bigger Eurorack system or for dedicated Buchla style systems. Lastly, the Zadar is a completely different type of envelope generator. I personally don't like that each CV input is hardwired to an envelope and that you have to press the selection button 3 times to go from envelope B back to envelope A as it only cycles forward. I also found that I was only using a few envelope shapes as I could not remember most shapes in the heat of patching, truly limiting its potential. That being said, I find the Zadar excels in very small racks where it's hard to patch up unpredictable or complex CV patterns, as the Zadar comes with many complex patterns already built in. It has the smallest size footprint, making it ideal for small racks where every HP matters. With the warp and response parameters, you can also affect your vectors in a way that sounds different to typical ADSR envelopes. And you can use the Zadar as an oscillator in a pinch. For me, I found the more my system grew, the less I used the Zadar, and I would personally not recommend it for bigger systems, unless you identified a specific need for the Zadar to fill. Alright, that's it for today's episode. I hope it helped you out. Feel free to let me know what your favorite quad envelope generator is in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.